Alright, we're going to continue the rest of this video. We just talked in the last video about all the different factors in the intrinsic pathway and the extrinsic pathway, and we had a whole bunch of arrows going everywhere. And that's complicated. Just try to remember a generalized pathway that, 12 activates factor 11, factor 11 activates factor 9, but factor 9 depends upon, what is it? Factor 8, and it also depends upon platelet factor 3 in order to turn this, but in order to get this guy to this guy, he needs factor 7A, and he also needs calcium. And then this guy needs platelet factor 3, and factor 9A combines with 3 and 7A, and this helps to be able to turn activate factor 10, and then factor 10, let's just put 10 there, and then 10 combines with 3 guys. He combines with factor 5, he combines with calcium, and he combines with PF3 to form prothrombin activator. And so, that's the best I think I can give you. 12 to 11. 11 needs 7A and calcium to be able to activate factor 9. Factor 9 combines with factor 8 and PF3, and it also combines with the factor 3 and the 7A to activate factor 10. Factor 10 needs to combine with factor 5 calcium and platelet factor 3 to form the prothrombin activator. And so this is basically the intrinsic and the extrinsic pathway in just like the simplest diagram that I possibly can think of for you guys. And but that's basically it. We basically talked about all of those guys and all the different pathways that they go through. So we finished off in our last video talking about the intrinsic and the extrinsic pathway. What we're going to talk about now is, let's try this a little bit higher, is I'm going to draw almost where we left off. But I'm just not going to draw a lot of the things that we, like all the factors. Okay, I'm going to draw the damaged endothelial cells, and then I'm going to show the underlying collagen fibers. Okay, I'm going to show von Willebrand's factor. This should become second nature by now after all of this constant refreshers. I'm going to show the platelets who are aggregating, and they do the 3 S's. By now you should know the joke. It's not the sugar, honey, iced tea, shower and shave. It's going to become swelled, spike processes, and become sticky, and then it releases the aggregating agent and has the net negative charges. And then we went through all the cascade. 12, 11, 11. 11 combines with factor 7 calcium to activate factor 9. Factor 9 combines with factor 8 and platelet factor 3. Factor 9-8A complex combines with factor 3-7A complex. That activates factor 10. Factor 10 combines with factor 5. Platelet factor 3 and calcium to form the prothrombin activator. That's where we're at so far. So let's draw that most important step that I told you guys that would be important to know, is that activated factor 10 combines with factor 5 to form activated factor 5, calcium, and platelet factor 3. What is platelet factor 3? It's the negatively charged phospholipid on the external membrane of the aggregated platelet. We talked about that. And that forms the very important structure, which is the prothrombin activator. Now what does this do? Well, prothrombin activator has 2 arms. Okay? What he does is he has this arm, and in this arm he has a specific molecule, and this specific molecule is called prothrombin 2. Well, what happens is whenever factor 10 activates the prothrombin activator starts to become very, very excited. And he starts to swing his arm. He swings his arm so much that he ends up throwing the prothrombin. But when he throws the prothrombin, now he doesn't do all this, I'm just trying to make it simple so it becomes more interesting. He throws the prothrombin 2 and finally turns prothrombin 2 and transforms it from a large plasma protein thrombin 2 to a very powerful molecule called thrombin. That is the second phase that we talked about. Remember, coagulation is composed of 3 phases. Phase 1 is the intrinsic or the extrinsic pathway. Phase 2 is the common pathway to forming thrombin. Phase 3 is the common pathway to the fibrin mesh. Now, we're talking about phase 2. So what is phase 2? Let's make this simple. I told you, this is the easy ones. Phase 2 and phase 3 is very easy. Basically what happens is in phase 2, the prothrombin activator transforms a large plasma protein called prothrombin 2 into thrombin. That's so simple. Easy, right? So phase 2, if I were to tell you what happens in phase 2 coagulation, you're just going to say, when factor 10 combines with factor 5, calcium and platelet factor 3, it forms the prothrombin activator, and the prothrombin activator activates prothrombin 2 and turns it into an enzyme called thrombin. That's it. That's so easy, so simple. Okay? So that's phase 2. Now, let's go into phase 3. Phase 3, it's not as complicated. It's actually pretty simple. Do we have enough room here? I'm just going to shed some of these platelets off. Let's shed some of these platelets off. Okay. Let's just make it like this. Okay, now, what is so important about this thrombin? Well, thrombin initiates clot formations. How does he initiate clot formations is very important. Okay, now, we're going to the third phase right now, the common pathway to the fibrin mesh. Thrombin does something very important. You know within our blood plasma, our blood plasma is made up of, basically, if we want to break it down, it's really 2 things. Okay. Water, 90% of it's actually going to be water because water helps to be able to dissolve and suspend. It acts as a dissolving and suspending medium for various amounts of solutes. It acts as a universal solvent and it helps to be able to absorb heat and act as a transporting fluid. The other 8%, and that 8% is made up of plasma proteins. 8% is made up of plasma proteins. What the heck am I talking about, plasma proteins? And the remaining amounts is made up of various amounts of solutes, metabolic enzymes, antibacterial enzymes, hormones, respiratory gases, nutrients, metabolic waste products, all kinds of different things. Maybe we'll do it in another video on blood and components, but for right now you just got to trust me that it's 8% plasma proteins. Well, these plasma proteins, there's really, I guess you could say, 3 categories. One is just albumin, and albumin makes up about 60% of that 8%. He just acts as a plasma protein that helps to be able to hold water into the bloodstream. He exerts osmotic pressure to maintain water balance between the blood and the tissues. Other ones are called alpha and beta globulins, and they just act as transport proteins to transport metal ions and lipid-soluble vitamins and steroid-based hormones and different kinds of lipid-soluble substances. And there's also another one called gamma globulins, or you can call them immunoglobulins, or you can just call them antibodies. And they're just glycoproteins produced by plasma cells during an immune response. The last one is the one we're going to be talking about, and that's called fibrinogen. Fibrinogen, this makes up 36%, 6%, and this makes up the remaining 4%. Fibrinogen is a plasma protein produced by the liver. So is albumin, so is alpha beta globulins. Gamma globulins are produced by plasma cells. Well, fibrinogen, what's so important about this? Fibrinogen, here's the key thing, you got to get this word. Fibrinogen is soluble. I'm going to say that 2 more times to get that into your head. Fibrinogen is soluble. What do I mean soluble? There's words that describe affinity or mixing with water, hydrophilic, hydrophobic. Well, fibrinogen is going to be hydrophilic. But what happens is if you take enough fibrinogen molecules and link them together, let's say here's a fibrinogen. I'm going to represent fibrinogen with just a circle. This is fibrinogen. Okay? I'm going to put F. I'll put Fi. Fibrinogen. What happens if I take a fibrinogen and I link another fibrinogen molecule together? And then I link another fibrinogen molecule. And then I link another fibrinogen molecule. Eventually, what begins to happen, and this is called polymerization. You're just linking fibrinogen molecules together. What happens is thrombin initiates this process. But what happens is if you take a whole bunch of fibrinogen molecules and link them together, eventually it becomes insoluble within the blood plasma. It becomes insoluble within the blood plasma and starts to make a strand. So I'm not going to draw like this anymore, I'm going to draw like this. Okay, so this is a fibrin. Now it's no longer fibrinogen, which is a soluble plasma protein, it's fibrin strands, which is just polymerized fibrinogen molecules. One of these is soluble. Multiple amounts of them make it insoluble. What begins to happen? Well, the fibrin strands begin to accumulate within the blood plasma and begin to cause the blood plasma to gel up, and that traps different elements of the molecules trying to pass through this area of injury. What begins to happen is these fibrin strands start laying on these platelets. Okay, they start laying on the platelets, but they're not really tight onto the platelets. They're not really tight onto the platelets. Okay, the platelet's plugged. Okay, and we got these platelets sticking together, nice spike processes, swelling up, sticky. But we gotta have something to tighten those platelets down to make a nice little plug, stabilize the clot. And that's the job of this fibrin, an insoluble fibrin strand that causes the blood plasma to gel up, trapping elements and other molecules passing it through. But see, we're not done yet. That's one of the things that thrombin does. So let's show that. Let's show it turns fibrinogen. I'm just going to draw like this. And it turns it into this. What is this called? This is called polymerization. And it just makes a whole bunch of fibrin molecules. I'm just going to draw like that. Okay, a whole bunch of fibrinogen molecules there. And this is called fibrin. Now I'm going to put here insoluble within the blood plasma. And this is soluble. You got to remember that. That's one of the things that thrombin does. But the next thing that thrombin does is very critical that you get this. Okay? Thrombin not only does this, but he does something else. Okay, let's show it like this. There's another factor. Another factor. It's like, oh my goodness, does it get any better? Yeah, they keep coming. I'm going to erase fibrin now. Actually, I'll just do it like this. There's another factor, and this factor is called factor 13. Okay? This factor is called factor 13. What factor 13 does is factor 13 reacts with the thrombin. And then there's also going to be another molecule who combines into this, and this is calcium. You got ionic calcium, you got factor 13, and you got thrombin, and finally it activates factor 13. This is a cross-linking enzyme. It's a fibrin stabilizing factor, or cross-linking enzyme. What does it do? Well, it binds the fibrin strands tightly together. What does it do? It's a cross-linking enzyme that binds the fibrin strands tightly together and begins to form the structural basis of the clot. It causes these fibrin strands to start really becoming sticky to one another into the platelets and starts anchoring it down, making that plug nice and tight. Once that occurs, that ends coagulation. Isn't it easy? So basically, if we were to just simplify it, basically, now that we've done that, the clot formation normally after the blood vessels damage, usually after the blood vessels damage, coagulation occurs within about 3 to 6 minutes. So usually this whole thing, well, everything we've gone over, from intrinsic, extrinsic, common pathway of thrombin, and then thrombin to fibrin mesh, that usually takes about 3 to 6 minutes after the blood vessel's been damaged. So this is a pretty quick event, 3 to 6 minutes. But just remember that, all of these things we've gone over. So, one more time before we move on to the next thing which I want to talk about, and that's going to be 2 things that aren't involved in hemostasis, but I believe that they're pretty important. One more time. Common pathway of thrombin. So this is phase 2. Let's cut this off right here. This is phase 2. And all of this under this is phase 3. Phase 2 is common pathway of thrombin. Phase 3 is the common pathway to fibrin mesh. In phase 2, factor 10A combines with calcium, platelet factor 3, factor 5 forms prothrombin activator. What does the prothrombin activator do? The prothrombin activator activates prothrombin to throws and makes thrombin. Then thrombin takes fibrinogen, which is a soluble plasma protein, and polymerizes it, links different fibrinogen molecules together, eventually making a fibrin strand which is insoluble. In the presence of plasma, it begins to cause the plasma to start to gel up. And then it traps different kinds of elements and molecules passing through that area of blood vessel damage. But that fiber mesh begins to accumulate and lay on the platelets, forming just kind of like the basis of the fiber mesh. But then we got to be able to anchor these fibrin strands tightly together, bind them together to stabilize that clot. So how do we do that? And to form that structural basis of the fiber mesh? Well, not only does thrombin do the polymerization, but he also combines with calcium and factor 13, activating factor 13, which is a cross-linking enzyme. It's also known as the fibrin stabilizing factor